Welcome, TAPAS fans, to podcast number 28. For the first time in several weeks, and probably the last time ever, we've got all 4 original segments today. A song from my Dungeons & Dragons musical now has a demo tape of the first minute and a half or so. I have artwork for 2 different Team Salmon projects, and of course, there's no shortage of Secrets of Droon books to read and Disney films to watch. Let's dive right into it. Let's start with the Dritz and the Companions of the Dance Hall segment. Mr. Brian LaGuardia has sent me a demo of the first minute and 42 seconds of the song We Got This. I chose that to be his free demo because it's the first song in the musical I didn't have a melody for. Brian wrote something, and I freaking adore it. It's just so much more legitimate musical theater than any of the songs I wrote. I do hope my songs and his don't clash with each other too much. So this is it, probably the last companion segment for a very long time, as I'll be keeping further production details under my hat. Here's the beginning of We Got This. Lyrics by me, music by Brian, vocals by me. He sent me a version with his vocals and a version that was just an instrumental, and I taught myself to sing it, so here it is. Without further ado, We Got This. With, let's put lyrics up on screen for you. And here it is.
It's not like I thought we'd reach Mithril Hall in an afternoon.
Don't worry.
But a hint at where to begin would be quite the boon.
You told me it's about the journey.
What I think we need to do, and soon, is get our hands on a map of all of Faerun.
I thought you wanted to tell a story.
Ugh, Mithril Hall might as well be on the moon. We're more likely to wind up in Narnia or even Droon.
Don't turn your back on all our future glory.
What the hell is Droon?
We've come all this way.
I have to say, to my dismay, maybe this isn't our day, eh?
Take it easy.
No one said this was gonna be easy, but a little bit more to go on would please me.
This is a game we know how to play.
What do we know? Do we have anywhere to go?
Don't let your doubts and fears lead you astray.
None of my ideas are things we would enjoy.
Take it easy, put your game face on, I pray.
Is there something you're trying to say, boy?
We got this. We're on the open road, so clear and free. We got this. We got panache and sass. We're gonna show them all what heroes do. What heroes do. And you'll be alright, 'cause I'm here with you. I'm here with you. We got this.
So that's great. Yeah, can't wait to get a full version of the song to sing along to, and then be able to sing it in a proper recording space while, standing up and everything. And then have the whole cast recorded. We're making headway, people. We truly are. And, I don't know if you hear panting, but, while I was pasting the song into the podcast, my family showed up. My mom and sisters and the dog. So they're here now. They'll be in next week's podcast, and we'll play a bunch of Jackbox games. That'll be awesome. So this week in Team Salmon, after months and months, Stacy finally found the time to sketch and color the adult characters of the Iris series, so at last I can break up my scripts where I describe those characters and talk about who I'd like to voice them. To recap, here are the protagonists in all their skimpily outfitted glory, and in the fantasy casting of them, I talked about 2 alternative casts. One if the voice work was done in Vancouver, one if it was more local with people from my life. The idea for the latter is people from my life for the teen protagonists, while professionals for the supporting cast, the adult members of Gaia. So let's start with sort of the leadership of Gaia. Here's Marty and Doc, who I've only just realized share those names with the heroes of Back to the Future. Can't believe it took me like 9 years to notice that. Marty, the elderly cyborg, a very kindly and wise mentor, and Doc, the mysterious scientist guy and business coordinator. Nobody is entirely sure exactly what Doc does. Who I'd cast in those roles is the same either way. Emilio Estevez as Marty, and Jan Rabson as Doc. I feel Marty merits something of a special guest star, and I like Emilio. Usually when something has a low-budget Canadian voice cast, the one celebrity in the cast is usually also Canadian. I think that's some sort of union law or something. So they tend to get, like, Martin Short or Catherine O'Hara or William Shatner or someone Canadian. And, Emilio Estevez is not Canadian, but I'm pretty sure you can bend that rule if you, like, really want to. I don't know. He's still the guy I'd hope to get for the indie version, so, you know, an indie version with a budget. Jan Rabson, as I mentioned previously in a Droon segment, is a very obscure voice actor, but I think he's one of the greats, and he's notable for the fact that he works in both Canadian and American productions. That's not notable, that's something only I care about. And the other three prominent members of the organization: Lydia, the therapist who tends to the organization's mental needs; Tina, the alien who provides them the advanced technology that gives them the edge; and Antonio, the chief of security. We'll explore stuff about them. For the Canadian version, let's cast Ashley Ball, Kathy Weseluk, and Andrew Francis. Not just going for Friendship is Magic cast members, it's just that there are only so many actors in Canada, and most of them have been in Friendship is Magic. For the actual version, I'm still going to go for some professionals. Let's say Tara Strong as Lydia, also from Friendship is Magic, but more importantly, the biggest voice actor in the world right now. For Tina, Katie Lung, best known for playing Cho Chang in the Harry Potter films. I kind of wanted Tina to have a very natural-sounding Scottish accent for whatever reason, so let's go with an actual Scot there. And for Antonio, I see some appeal in getting Crispin Freeman. I will obviously need some kind of sponsor behind me to get this particular cast, but, you know, just dreaming. It's not like I'll be in despair about the cartoon being no good if I can't get these pros. I know plenty of actors in my personal life. I also wanted to take this opportunity to re-show the Choices artwork I displayed last week and talk about my dream cast of that. My initial inclination was to assume that every character would be voiced by the person who was their basis, who chose their race and class, and whom I named and built the characters after, but reality set in with that. I'm planning on creating a pilot episode and casting it this year. And geography, availability, and inexperience are factors with my friends who are scattered all about the country. So I figure when I go back to Quincy, I'll hold auditions. I tried not to get any preconceived notions in my head about which of my Quincy theater friends should play the roles, but I couldn't help it. Fantasy casting is like second nature to me, so I'm already imagining which people I want in the roles, so I'm going to talk about that anyway. If they don't audition, if their audition proves they don't fill the role as well as I imagined, if someone I didn't expect gives a better audition, I'm totally prepared for all that. This is just how I imagine the cast right now at this point in time. Let this be a time capsule to compare to the real voice cast of Keys and Kingdoms, The Choices, in the future. So the central characters, in as much as there are central characters in our ensemble, are Eri and Zaya, who naturally were based on my little sisters, Ermi and Zia. I actually do hope I can get them to voice the characters, that at some point in the off-season I can get them into the studio or wherever where I'm setting things up. In July, I'm going to start making plans to go down there to Quincy once the restaurant closes for the season, so hopefully I can fit the Easters into that plan. Christella was based on Christine Kelly, my good friend, who writes a popular blog about the career of musician Kate Bush. I have very little interest in the content of her work, but I support the hell out of it anyway. She has a Patreon. You should check it out. When I was lamenting my lack of ability to write a melody, she volunteered to compose the music for the Choices pilot episode. That was big of her. Anyway, voice-wise, my thoughts drifted to Ashley Kennedy, who was ensemble and set design in my first big theatrical production when I played Sir Robin in Spamalot. I haven't worked with her since, but I have a lot of fond thoughts of everyone I was in Spamalot with, kind of a turning point of my life. Stacky was based on Stacey Lord, who drew the Iris artwork you saw a moment ago. We've been talking about starting up Some Sweet Kind of Vampire as a webcomic. And she has expressed interest in being the voice of Stacky. Maybe she can take a road trip or something. She also has a Patreon. You should check it out. In the event that Stacy is not the voice of Stacky, I had Adrian Fisk in mind, my dance partner for a big musical number when I was ensemble in the musical She Loves Me. Natalie was obviously based on my dear fiancée, Natalie Yenfjord. You remember her. The podcast has been so boring without her. She has a Patreon. You should check it out. For her voice, I'm hoping to get Emily Dozier. I've been in 2 shows with her. She's hosted cast parties for both. Very dear friend. I hope to coach her into being able to do a dead-on Natty impression. Kinsey, based on Mackenzie Eby, who's really into this project. She's already done some co-writing of future episodes with me, and will be the head of the storyboard department once we start that, which we intend to do very soon. She has a Patreon. You should check it out. For the character's voice, I picture Jen Shackleton, who was my love interest in the play Is He Dead, and has experience voicing elven fey beings, as she played Alvissa in my irregular webcomic sound set thingy. Mare was based on Meredith Muncie. She's not really involved in the project, but she's a supporter of it. She'll give us money and stuff when the time comes. She doesn't have a Patreon for you to check out, but she sells knitwear on Etsy. And this voice role goes to Gretchen Wolfmeyer, major supporter of Tapas, especially into Companions of the Dance Hall. Jax was based on Jack Stegman. I approached her during a game of D&D to be our antagonist. I think it would work if she were voiced by Grace Berensmeyer. Been casting her in a lot of things since we dated almost 10 years ago. Not entirely sure if she's big into being a performer, but I don't know. Just people from my life, always on my mind. Cezanne was based on my mom, and while I do hope to get my mom into some voice roles in the series, not this one in particular, I kind of want a special guest for the role of Cezanne, so I'm going to approach Heather MacDonald, aka the internet critic Kaluna. And finally, Gregorio, based on my mom's boyfriend Gregory, nice bloke. For his voice, Michael Gash, who ever so brilliantly voiced Pomab in my Icewind Dale Let's Play. Every single stage play I've ever been in, he was also in. He's been a theater fixture for decades. I don't fan cast him and stuff nearly often enough. Gregorio and Cezanne aren't in the pilot, so won't be casting them this year, but once it's time for a season 1, I think I'll just approach Michael rather than try to audition anyone. Today in Droon, we're reading book 25. This is one of the books that I definitely didn't read before I collected the entire series 4 or 5 years ago. All I remember is that the twist revealed about Zorfendorf confused the hell out of me, and my confusion wasn't cleared up until one of the last pages of the entire series. I'm not often confused by plot elements in anything, so kudos to Tony Abbott there. Anyway, here's the cover. Book 25, The Riddle of Zorfendorf Castle. Let's do it. Chapter 1, At the Beach. The book opens with Eric, Julie, and Neil having a day at the beach. Mr. Frando is fishing, and Meredith, as always, seems to be watching them from a distance. The soccer ball flares to life to call them to Droon, and they pray that Meredith didn't notice. They return to Eric's home and take the stairs, which lead them to a dark corridor inhabited by a beastly snail. Chapter 2, Playing with Models. Kia, Max, and Khan whisk them away. As it turns out, they are all in the very palace of Ko himself, hovering 500 feet above the ground. They spy on a meeting of beasts, Ko and Gethwing looking over a model of Droon, preparing for the Darklands to take over the free part of Droon. Ko says that the key to his victory lies within Zorfendorf Castle. Kidspar bursts in on the meeting, and a battle ensues. Khan and Neil jam the Flying Fortress's engines, and the whole place crashes in the sands of Lumpland. Chapter 3, The Big Red Book. The 7 heroes bail from the Flying Palace as the beasts regain control over it and fly off. On the backs of some pilkas, they ride like the wind to Zorfendorf, a massive white castle in the center of a grassy plain. Eric ponders the fact that they've never actually met Prince Zorfendorf, with Khan and Max explaining that some say he's an explorer, or a recluse, or that he doesn't even exist. No one really knows. They meet with Thog, who reveals that he's only recently discovered a book called The History of Zorfendorf Castle, and feels he was fated to find it now in order to repel Ko's invasion. The heavy book turns out to be completely blank except for the final page, written in Galen's hand. Dated 7 years ago, it explains that Galen created Zorfendorf Castle and put a spell over all of Droon so that everyone would think it had been there for centuries. Zorfendorf Castle conceals something called the Fifth River. By the time the page ends, Galen has fallen under his own spell, and he too believes Zorfendorf Castle has always existed. Our heroes easily conclude that the Fifth River is what Ko is searching for. Finding a map that shows Zorfendorf Castle is built at a spot where 4 rivers meet, they go to search for this convergence point to see if it leads them to the fifth. Chapter 4, A Bunch of Riddles. Ko's palace begins to descend on Zorfendorf as they head into the castle dungeons to find the convergence point. They find that the four rivers meet at a magic fountain, covered in writing that only Spar can read. Chapter 5, The Magic Word. Spar reads it. 4 rivers, one from each of the 4 seas of Droon, meet here and form a 5th. Its journey is for one alone. Speak only this last word, and the 5th river will come. The last word of the passage is one that Spar doesn't know. Thog reports that Ko has sent out an army of wing snakes to open the battle, and Spar goes to fight them. The heroes think they'll have to wait for him to return and decipher the last word, but Eric somehow knows it. Ithra. The 5th river bursts forth from the fountain, gushing straight upwards, and a stone boat appears for them to ride. Eric doesn't know how he knows, but he knows that Ithra means the upper world. Ko intends to use the 5th river to invade the upper world. They board the stone boat and ride it upwards. Chapter 6, Up, Up, and Away. As the boat blasts off into the sky, Kid Spar fights off the wing snakes. They realize that they're coming up right at the same beach where they were lounging at the beginning of the book. Julie distracts the beachgoers by shape-shifting into an impressively large fish, while the others sneak onto the shore. They hide Max, Khan, and Kia's unusual clothing from onlookers, and quickly make their way back to Eric's house to take the rainbow stairs again before Ko gets his hands on the 5th river. They wonder why Ko and Gethwing are so keen to capture Kid Spar. What could he have now that he didn't before? Indeed, why did Ko kidnap Spar as a baby in the first place? They take the staircase back to Zorfendorf Castle, where Queen Relna and King Zello are joining the battle. Chapter 7, The Ring of Midnight. The King and Queen explain that they've learned the Ring of Midnight is only part of a magical object, the other half being the Moon Medallion. When the 2 artifacts are combined, millions of words of ancient magical secrets are revealed. From these words, the King and Queen learned that Zorfendorf was created to hide the 5th river, and that the river itself was created 5 centuries earlier by Zara, in the hopes of sending young Spar back home. Zara hid the fountain from view and died on that very spot. 500 years later, the fountain became visible again, and Galen built Zorfendorf to conceal it. They also learned of a way to repel Ko's invasion, the Wizard's Sneeze, a magical talking siege engine shaped like Galen's head. Chapter 8, Big Head, Big Nose. The Wizard's Sneeze blasts Ko's forces with huge gusts of wind that drive them back. As Thog, the Zorfendorf guards, and the King and Queen battle the beasts, Spar realizes that Ko and Gethwing have already made their way into the palace, and have found their way to the 5th river via a secret passage, which Spar says he told them about. Chapter 9, Some Things Never Change. As it turns out, Spar learned of the secret passage while continuing to investigate the fountain, while the rest of the party was in the upper world, and Ko simply plucked the information from Spar's mind by way of a psychic link they've shared for most of Spar's life. Spar volunteers to use himself as bait to keep Ko away from the 5th river, but the others agree to stay at Spar's side and protect him. Kia gives Spar the Moon Medallion without hesitation, and he uses it to trigger a flashback of the moment Zara created the 5th river. They are also enraptured by this flashback that they're caught completely off guard when Ko bursts into the chamber. Chapter 10, And Some Things Do. Enraged, Spar triggers the 5th river to take him back to the upper world, giving Eric the medallion and instructing him to destroy the fountain to keep it out of Ko's hands. Eric does so, but not before Gethwing pursues Spar to the upper world. Ko retreats along with his palace and his fortress, and as the rainbow stairs appear and the party prepare to return to the upper world to stop Gethwing, the stairs vanish again, stranding them in Droon. So, the only newly introduced guest character in this book would be the Wizard's Sneeze. Naturally, the device should be played by Galen's actor. Well, I had originally intended to be Mark Hamill, but am now picturing series author Tony Abbott. And there we go. Here's me confused for the rest of the series about whether Prince Zorfendorf was a real person or not. Not that it really matters, it just kind of stuck with me. Overall, this is a great book with a kick-ass cliffhanger. Let's proceed. And today in Keys and Kingdoms, our Disney film is the 1979 science fiction feature, The Black Hole. I don't know squat about this film. Let's get right into it. And this being our first science fiction Disney film, well, 20,000 Leagues is kind of sci-fi, I guess, but our first space travel film, at least. I'm definitely excited for some science fiction inspirations for Keys and Kingdoms. I don't really have much experience with sci-fi RPGs. I played 2 I mean, I played a 2-session-long Star Wars campaign once, and 5th edition D&D does have a section in the Dungeon Master's Guide about finding Renaissance-era, modern-day, and futuristic weapons, so that's cool. But what sort of science fiction elements will be a staple of Keys and Kingdoms? Whichever ones appear in Disney films like this one, I suppose. So, real-time thoughts, this film is in super widescreen and opens with some patriotic-sounding musical score over such a long period of black screen that I wondered if maybe YouTube only had the audio and I was supposed to be seeing credits at this point, but no. 2 minutes into this film, the first number ends and the credits start playing. Bit of an odd way to begin a film, that. The credits roll over some proto-CGI grid and starlight. This is 1979. I wonder if this film was like Disney's answer to Star Wars. Well, they don't need to do that anymore, God help us all. In a first, the cast consists almost entirely of people I've never heard of in my life, save Ernest Borgnine, who gets the and starring treatment. And I noticed the opening credits didn't list every single person who worked on the film, just the important ones. I wonder if this is when films started including end credits. Well, now that I think about it, I know that Star Wars had end credits, and now I suddenly remember reading something about how Star Wars was maybe the first film to have no opening credits whatsoever, so probably the first film where all the credits were at the end. And I remember I've seen Jaws, which came out 2 years before Star Wars. Did Jaws have end credits? Okay, I looked up end credits on Wikipedia because I was curious. According to Wikipedia, while some films such as The Wizard of Oz gave a cast list at the end of the picture, the first major films to feature end credits instead of opening credits were 1956's Around the World in 80 Days and 1961's West Side Story. So I was wrong, Star Wars wasn't the first. 1978's Superman had end credits which ran for nearly 8 minutes, while the current record holder is the 15-minute end credit sequence of 2016's Assassin's Creed. That's not relevant, but yeah, I now anticipate, and I'll see if I'm right, that right now that we're approaching the 80s, every film I watch will have end credits, which I will sit through every single time, you know. I'm watching these films, yeah. Anyway, I discovered something interesting upon looking at this film's IMDb page. 6 actors, only one of which I'd heard of before, were listed in the opening credits. According to IMDb, there is one other credited actor in the film, uncredited voice roles from Roddy McDowall and Slim Pickens, and a cameo from the director, and that's the entire cast, a total of 10 characters. Does this entire film take place on a single spaceship and deal solely with that ship's crew? I'll bet it does. How very bold and cool. Okay, now I'm gonna actually watch the freaking film. So the movie goes right into being a movie. There's a spaceship, the Palomino, and the ship's robot, Vincent, voiced by Roddy McDowall, reports that they're approaching the biggest black hole he's ever seen. The opening credits ended less than a minute ago, and the titular black hole is already becoming a factor. I do like a movie that gets straight to the point. In the vicinity of the black hole, the crew of the Palomino see the Cygnus, a ship that's been missing for 20 years. Having never heard of any of the other actors before, I'm definitely latching onto Ernest Borgnine's character Harry, whose first line is to describe the black hole as being straight out of Dante's Inferno. As for Vincent, his robotic monotone seems to be a waste of a perfectly good Roddy McDowall. Then again, at least unlike in Bedknobs and Broomsticks, I at least know which character Roddy McDowall is playing. Anyway, they approach the Cygnus, getting dangerously close to the black hole to do so. Once they're near the ship, they find that the black hole has stopped exerting any force. The Cygnus hasn't moved a centimeter since they spotted it, and now they're not affected by the black hole's gravity either. Okay, this film's quite intriguing. The musical score is very intense and dramatic. Okay, well, I think it's obvious that the first space-themed thing to add to Keys and Kingdoms has to be black holes. We finally get some scale. The Cygnus is massive, while the Palomino is a tiny little probe. The black hole starts pulling them in once they pass the Cygnus, and it damages the ship. Vincent goes out to make repairs, and the captain gives a rather interesting order to the only woman on the ship, one Dr. Kate McRae, whose father was aboard the Cygnus when it vanished. See if you can reach Vincent with your ESP. Evidently they have psionics in this universe. Do they have those in 5th edition? I've never seen them. Well, noted, I guess. So in a very tense action sequence, the crew of the Palomino get themselves back into the zero-gravity field apparently being generated by the Cygnus, and all the lights on the Cygnus turn on. The crew board the Cygnus, which seems empty, but Kate feels certain there are people around, someone watching them. Vincent gets around by hovering, and I'm baffled as to how they did that with 1979 special effects, so score 1 for this film over Star Wars, you know? At least R2-D2 rolls along on the ground, but this guy hovers. They finally run into some sort of crew in a control tower, but they all seem to be robots, and the only one who reacts to their presence is a very evil-looking one with clawed hands. A German-accented voice from the shadows sounds, seemingly the only human on board, and he tells the evil-looking robot, Maximilian, to stand down. How many different kinds of robots and droids can there be in Keys and Kingdoms? Well, varieties based on the robots from this film is a great place to start. Harry identifies the German guy as Hans Reinhardt, the leader of the Cygnus' expedition. He reports that Kate's father has died, and that the rest of the crew was sent back to Earth, and he is saddened that they apparently never made it back. Reinhardt and McCrae stayed behind. Reinhardt says he has no intention of returning to Earth, and promises information that will make their voyage of historic importance. It seems he's discovered an element he's named Signium that could be used as an endless energy source. Many members of the crew of the Palomino are quite sure there's something Reinhardt isn't telling them, and several sneak off to investigate. One crewman sees a bunch of robots firing something into the black hole, and is caught by Maximilian. Harry, meanwhile, tries to interrogate some of Reinhardt's other robots, but they don't speak. The subject turns to the nearby black hole. Reinhardt suspects it might lead somewhere, and offers to discuss it further over dinner. While the humans sit down to dinner, Vincent hangs out with some of the ship's robots, including an older model Vincent probe by the name of Bob, voiced by Slim Pickens, and Captain Starr, a human-shaped sharpshooter who was in charge before Maximilian was built and promoted over him. Vincent, incidentally, speaks almost entirely in proverbs and quotations, but not in an annoying way. It's quite possible to converse with him. It was very well done. Reinhardt hosts the crew of the Palomino for dinner over mushroom soup, and he finally reveals his intentions. He's sent a probe to the black hole's event horizon, and if it returns and his calculations are correct, he intends to take the Cygnus through the black hole and see what's on the other side. Now that he's been found, he wants the Palomino to monitor his journey. Bob takes Vincent aside, able to speak freely now that they're out of the company of Maximilian and Reinhardt's other loyal robots, to explain that the crew of the Palomino are in danger. He says that Reinhardt's robotic crew were actually the human crew of the Cygnus, kept alive through some means and enslaved, more machine than human, and he describes the Cygnus as a death ship. Vincent informs the crew of the Palomino of as much, and the Palomino prepares to flee, that the ship's chief science officer, Alex, wants to stay with Reinhardt and attempt the mission. Hearing that the Palomino wants to leave, Reinhardt prepares to blast off into the black hole. Alex removes the mask of one of Reinhardt's robots, revealing a human face. That's the cameo from our director. Reinhardt tries to justify his actions of murdering the crew and turning them into drones, sure that it was by divine providence that he's here by the black hole, and he sets Maximilian loose. Maximilian kills Alex, to Reinhardt's mild disappointment, and a briefly whispered, "Protect me from Maximilian," from Reinhardt to Kate implies that it's Maximilian rather than Reinhardt who's calling the shots. But it's nevertheless Reinhardt who orders his robot soldiers to kill off the crew of the Palomino. Vincent, Bob, and the captain, Dan, go to the hospital where Kate has been taken and save her from being turned into one of Reinhardt's drones. The weapons in this film are very cool double-barreled handguns that shoot 2 laser beams. I like them. Dan looks very much like Han Solo in this moment with his posing and stuff, and the soundtrack goes all patriotic again despite how menacing it's been through most of the film. The 2 robots and 2 humans fight their way back to the Palomino. Reinhardt orders Maximilian to shoot down the Palomino once there's some distance between it and the Cygnus. While the last remaining crewman, Charlie, tries to rescue Dan and the others, Harry is the last crewman remaining on the Palomino and fakes a broken leg so he can escape by himself. All the while, the Cygnus creeps ever closer to the black hole. Harry flees in the Palomino, and the little probe is shot down by Maximilian, leaving the rest of the crew, unbeknownst to Reinhardt, alive on the Cygnus. The survivors try to make their way to the Cygnus' small probe ship to make their escape, a matter complicated by the Cygnus being caught in a meteor storm, and it's truly awesome. Keys and Kingdoms note, meteor storms. They try to flee through Reinhardt's vegetable garden, but a hole is blown in the ship. Quite awesomely, the garden instantly freezes when it's exposed to space, and they're all covered in frost. That's a cool thing to happen. Airlock breaches, and the frostiness resulting. Meanwhile, Reinhardt gives up on the black hole and decides to go for the probe ship himself, but he gets stuck under some rubble, and Maximilian decides not to help him. Reinhardt dies there on the bridge, his cries for help going unanswered by his crew. You know, the first ever photograph of a black hole was taken, I think earlier this year, and it does not look dissimilar to the black hole from this 1979 movie. Kudos to Disney Special Effects for that one. So the 5 survivors, Dan, Charlie, Kate, Vincent, and Bob, make their way to the probe ship, only to have a final confrontation with Maximilian. Bob, after having fought valiantly and gotten out of more horrible scrapes than anyone else, is killed in the confrontation, and Vincent holds off Max while the human crew go into the probe ship. Vincent successfully kills Max, and the previously silent killer robot dies screaming. Dan, Kate, Charlie, and Vincent get into the probe as the Cygnus is sucked into the black hole. But they find that the probe has been pre-programmed to Reinhardt's course, and that they too are going straight into the black hole. Our 4 remaining heroes brace themselves and pray that Reinhardt was a genius after all. In the final moments of the film, we see Reinhardt and Maximilian float through space and be absorbed into one another, forming some sort of Reinhardt-Max fusion in some fiery death world somewhere. Our 4 heroes, meanwhile, pass through a crystalline tunnel and into a realm of bright light. And there, the end credits roll over the film's terrifying, menacing theme music. Well, that was a beautiful piece of science fiction, complete with an ambiguous ending, very different from what Disney usually does. I'm very glad that, on a whim, I included this film on my list. It was quite good, and definitely a great foundation for building the science fiction side of Keys and Kingdoms. And okie dokie then, that's the end of this episode. Next week, my mom and sisters are here for a visit, so they'll be in next week's podcast episode, and there's going to be lots of Jackbox Party Pack games appearing on the channel. See you later.